I froze when my father-in-law locked the door and whispered, "Please don't tell anyone." I thought he wanted to protect his son, but his words uncovered a betrayal that would destroy my family. I'm Halona Thunderbird, a high school art teacher. I believed family meant trust. I never imagined my own sister would become the reason my marriage fell apart. The air in Arthur's study always smelled of aged parchment and expensive pipe tobacco, a scent that usually signaled comfort. But as the heavy oak door clicked shut, the sound vibrated in my chest like a warning. Arthur stood before me, his shoulders slumped, his usually sharp eyes clouded with a frantic, desperate light. When he spoke, the 6 words felt like a physical blow, stripping the floor out from under me. "Please don't tell anyone," he murmured, his voice trembling. He gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles turning porcelain white. I stood in the middle of the room, my purse feeling suddenly heavy in my hand, my mind racing to reconcile the man I respected with the trembling figure in front of me. He had called me over with a frantic urgency that suggested a medical crisis or a financial disaster, yet here he was, asking for silence regarding something far more personal. I looked at the family photos on his desk, my husband Mark, smiling next to my sister Clara, and a cold, sharp dread settled in my stomach. I didn't say yes and I didn't say no. I simply turned and walked out, the silence of the house pressing against my ears. I knew then that the foundation of my life had developed a hairline fracture, and the tremors were only just beginning to reach the surface of my reality. Over the next few days, the world seemed to shift just enough to be noticeable, like a landscape seen through a distorted lens. Mark began arriving home later than usual, his shirt collars smelling faintly of a perfume that was certainly not mine, but not quite Clara's either. He moved through our home like a ghost, his attention constantly tethered to his phone, which he kept face down on every surface. I remembered the way he had laughed a little too loudly at a joke Clara made during our last Sunday brunch, a moment that had seemed innocent at the time, but now felt heavy with hidden meaning. Clara, too, had changed. She had stopped calling me daily to vent about her mundane dating life, instead becoming evasive, her eyes darting away whenever I asked her about her weekend plans. I started noticing small, impossible-to-ignore details. A missing pair of earrings she had borrowed from me months ago, now appearing in a photo she'd posted on social media, taken in a restaurant Mark claimed he hadn't visited in years. I watched them both from the periphery, my heart hardening into a tight, aching knot. I decided then to pull back, to become the silent observer in my own life, gathering the evidence I needed to confirm what my gut already knew. It was a terrifying game to play, living with the person you thought you knew while knowing they were an actor in a play you weren't supposed to see. The connections formed slowly, like ink spreading through water, until the picture was undeniably clear. I began checking the credit card statements that I usually left to Mark to handle. There were charges for luxury boutique hotels in the city, places we hadn't stayed at together, and dinners for 2 that coincided with the nights Mark claimed to be working late at the firm. I found a hidden folder on his computer, disguised under a mundane label of home renovation projects. Inside were photos, not of paint swatches or tiles, but of Clara, taken at various angles while she was unaware, and a series of text messages that chilled my blood. They were discussing dates, using code words I finally understood, and making plans that excluded me entirely. The betrayal wasn't just physical. It was an elaborate, coordinated effort to deceive me for months. Every time I had offered Clara a place at our table, every time I had poured Mark a glass of wine, they were actively laughing at my blind loyalty. I sat in my darkened kitchen, the light of my laptop screen illuminating the tears I refused to let fall. My sister, my flesh and blood, had systematically dismantled the trust I had placed in her since childhood. The pain was sharp, but it was also clarifying. The mystery of their distance was solved, and the path forward began to solidify in my mind. I moved through the following week like an automaton, keeping my head down and my mouth shut. I knew that one wrong word, one slip of my stoic facade, would give them the chance to spin a new web of lies. I found the final confirmation in a shared digital cloud account they had foolishly forgotten to secure. It contained a timeline of their affair, dating back nearly a year, and logs of phone calls that lasted for hours during the times I was supposedly away visiting my parents. The realization that my marriage had been a hollow shell for so long made me feel like an outsider looking into a life I no longer recognized. I felt the familiar weight of heartbreak, a dull, throbbing sensation in my throat. But I forced it down. I was an artist. I understood that even in the darkest composition, there was a point of focus. I became that focus. I started moving important documents, birth certificates, and financial records into a secure off-site deposit box. I opened a separate bank account in my own name, transferring the funds that were legally mine. My sister had taken my husband, but she would not take my future. I was playing a long game now, building a fortress out of facts and cold, hard logic, while they continued to treat my life like a playground for their selfish whims. Dinner that evening was a grotesque performance. Mark sat at the head of the table, his smile easy and practiced, while Clara poked at her salad, her eyes rarely meeting mine. They were growing careless, their confidence buoyed by my perceived ignorance. At one point, Mark reached out to squeeze my hand, his touch feeling like a burn, while his phone buzzed incessantly with a message I was certain came from her. I played the part, offering a gentle smile and making small talk about my students' art projects. It was in that moment that I realized how much they truly thought of me. As someone so small, so easily manipulated, that I would never dare to peek behind the curtain. But I had seen enough. My father-in-law, Arthur, had been quiet throughout the meal, his gaze shifting between us with a heavy, pained expression. I saw him catch Clara's eye, and the look of pure, unadulterated contempt he shot her told me everything I needed to know. He knew. He had known for a while, and he was as disgusted as I was. The truth was far deeper than just an affair. It was a family rot, a collective choice to abandon decency for the sake of hidden pleasures. I wasn't just fighting a husband and a sister. I was navigating a minefield of shared secrets that reached further into the family tree than I had ever suspected. I stopped blaming myself for not seeing it sooner. The guilt, which had weighed on me for weeks, evaporated, replaced by a crystalline sense of purpose. I began to talk to a divorce attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who listened to my story without judgment. We discussed the legal implications of the financial records I had gathered. She helped me realize that by documenting their deceit, I was not just protecting myself. I was taking control of a narrative that they had tried to steal from me. I started visiting a close friend, an accountant, who helped me track the diverted funds Mark had been using for his lifestyle with Clara. Every transaction, every hotel receipt, every digital trace was cataloged and saved. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a strategist. I spent my evenings in my studio, not painting, but building a dossier that would dismantle the lives they had so carefully constructed. I promised myself that I wouldn't let them off easily. If they wanted to burn down my world, I would make sure they were standing in the middle of the flames when the truth finally caught up to them. My strength wasn't in my capacity to endure their lies, but in my ability to force them to live with the consequences of their actions. The motive was as shallow as the people involved. It wasn't just attraction. It was greed and a desperate, pathetic need to feel superior. I discovered through an old email chain that Mark and Clara had been plotting to acquire my family's small inheritance, a piece of land my grandmother had left solely to me. They needed me to be legally bound to them, to be in a position where I was too distracted by my crumbling marriage to manage my own affairs. They had manipulated my father-in-law into helping them keep the secret, threatening him with the revelation of his own past mistakes if he dared to speak up. It was a pathetic, small-minded scheme that had ruined so many lives just to pad their pockets. The depth of their malice took my breath away. It wasn't an impulse. It was a calculated campaign of emotional and financial abuse. I saw the wreckage they had left in their wake, others they had swindled, friends they had alienated, and the hollow, miserable people they had become. I realized that my sister and husband were not just betraying me. They were betraying the very concept of integrity. Their jealousy of my success, my independence, and my life had festered into a cancer, and they had chosen to cut it out of me by trying to destroy my happiness. I spent the final days gathering the physical proof. I printed every text, every bank statement, and every photo. I had a box, neatly organized, containing the anatomy of my own heartbreak. Arthur came to me, his hands shaking as he handed me a set of private journals he had kept, documenting their conversations. "I couldn't live with the lie anymore, Halona," he whispered, his eyes wet. He apologized for his cower,